Who am I really? We all ask this of ourselves at some point. Are we our thoughts and actions? Does meaning define who we are, or is it our pain? Some have said that it is pain that proves definitively that life is so. There is nothing more real or final than that. I believe these are questions we often ask ourselves when we play tabletop role-playing games. And you can say that is corny, but I want you to ask yourself what it is we are actually doing when we consume a story. It was Jung who first truly understood what our stories and our myths were. They were a reflection of us. They were avatars of the collective human spirit asking the question, who am I really? I have played and ran D&D games since 2018, and it's been a crazy ride, but was also a time filled with growth. Over that time, I have created many characters, and I have had the opportunity to reflect on their stories. I'm certainly not the first person to notice that our characters have something of us in them, which is why we are so apt to grow attached to them. What if I were to tell you, though, that what most people don't realize is how deep this actually goes? I am going to attempt to show you this by going over a series of characters I have created, and perform the emotionally grueling act of dissecting sometimes intensely personal aspects of these characters and my psychology. Kokia was my first 5th edition character that I played in a real campaign, and the only one to finish out the entirety of it. I had been running games as a DM for a while, which may sound crazy that I was more of a DM first than a player. At this time though, I wanted to expand my friend group and to see how others ran games, and so I met a group ran by a now close friend of mine, Des. Her and several of her friends were playing through the Princes of the Apocalypse campaign, and so I made a Wood Elf druid named Kokia. I'd based her concept off of a song by a musician by the same name. Kokia never knew her mother, and the subject never really came up between her and her father. A diplomat by trade, her father lived a life Kokia found intensely uncomfortable and degrading. She believed that it was out of their nature to be separated from nature, to live in this city where greed ruled and people's lives were treated like currency. At the age of 25, a very young age for a wood elf, she ran away from the city, chasing the calls of a spirit whose voice floated on the wind every evening. She would for hundreds of years never be heard from again by the outside world as she entered the woods of that distant land that called her home. It was not as though this self-imposed hermit did not interact with people ever, but humans were uncommon and the other druids were as aloof as she was. Instead, she lived with a large parliament of owls. Yes, I looked that up. Yes, it is actually a parliament. Occasionally spying on and maybe even interacting with passing humans. Kokia, needless to say, did not develop a proper sociability, frequently testing the effects of certain teas on bewildered, if not somewhat dull-minded passerbys. Then, everything changed when the cult of the Eternal Flame attacked. Someone began torching large swaths of her forest. They dug deeper and deeper, where one day they threatened her family, with one owl in particular being her sort of daughter, Luna. This brazen and unwarranted act of aggression infuriated Kokia, so she determined to find who had done this and to bring them to justice. This led her to joining a small band of heroes on the same mission. These people confused and frustrated her constantly, and sometimes she felt like they didn't actually know what they were doing or why they were really there. This band would have to do, though. And while she adventured with them, she came upon the most unlikely mentor a druid could possibly meet. A lich. Renwick Cardoon, a man who was once a hero whose obsession with the arcane led him to pursue lichdom. However, Renwick only became a lich because his brother gave him the potion instead of letting him die in battle. Renwick's reluctance at who and what he was struck Kokia intensely, and he was the first person she truly respected for his clarity, even if it came from the cost of his foolishness. Renwick was still a man of principle, and he taught Kokia what one becomes when they are corrupted within the line of duty, It was from Renwick that she learned of the tenets of the oaths of the ancients, and it was before him that she swore those oaths. With the purpose of her words still echoing in her ears, Kokia descended into the caverns below the monastery, and it was there where she would die. In the deep chambers beneath the temple of the Howling Hatred, Kokia and her fellow heroes would come face to face with the elemental prince of evil air. A massive portal to the plane of air sat open behind him, and his servant on the material plane, Orisi Kalanoth, possessed the artifact spear Windvane, the only means by which to seal off the tear between the planes and stop the armies of elementals. Orisi fell as the battle continued to rage against the Prince of Evil Air. Not knowing what to do and getting quickly overwhelmed, several of the heroes yelled out to destroy the artifact, and as Kokia stood between them and their foe, her breath was ripped from her lungs, leaving her dead when the spear exploded with wrathful elemental magics. It was only by miracle that the remainder escaped with the bodies of their deceased allies. And so, Ches was born. Ches was the culmination of my desire to play a peer support character, having always been the main healer in literally every game I've ever played. One part cleric, another part bard, Ches was a pacifist through and through. But damn useful in an intense fight. The key to playing a peer support is to use everything you can. Don't ever let your turn go to waste by lack of imagination. I once used the infamous pocket sand in another campaign as Ches in order to blind a sea serpent. It really did work. Ches was a local cleric of Ilmater who was more accomplished than most gave credit for. I really liked this character, but I came to an awful and funny conclusion that if I were to play this character honestly, I would have to resurrect the entire team the moment I realized I could. Ches is a good person through and through, a bit broken and having to hide her identity under the persona of a boy, but if she could resurrect a hero, what better could she use her power for? So, Kokia was back. And trust me, this was a decision I did not make lightly, because I really did want to play this new character, and she is going to come in for a later video. Kokia's entire reality turned on its head when she woke up. She died. She had kept her oaths, but she failed. Something about this lit a raging fire in her, and for the first time, wrath entered her heart. This was an emotion, core conflict, and temptation that she would battle with for the rest of her life. She did not just hate the cults, she loathed them with every fiber of her being. She raged against a world that would allow for these villains. She raged against those societies that would breed these kinds of people who would give their lives to this evil. Kokia, in a possession of swirling emotions, swore to uphold the oaths of the ancients once more, and to eradicate every one of those who threatened the natural order to the last. The real test did not come with the battle against the army of evil air. It did not come with the descent back into the temple to finish the job. The final and true test was her ally, and one of her only true friends, Fabulous Fabrice the Pixie. Fabulous Fab, or just Fab, had come to a different conclusion to Kokia. He believed it was possible to strike a deal with the cult for mutual gain. He believed it would be foolish to continue the war against the cult when the fighting could stop now and everyone could profit out of what he saw as a massive misunderstanding of motivating needs. Kokia would not have this and could not have this, and so with Windvane reforged, she gave Fab an ultimatum. Its silvered shaft clenched tightly enough to squeeze the blood from her hand. She said he would either move or she would send his corpse to the other side on a spit. Kokia meant every word she said, and as he did not move, Windvane ripped towards Fab, and the portal, streaking with the light of the stars, he teleported out of the way in disbelief, and the final cult was sealed away. Kokia would go on to part ways from a majority of the group, but she never forgot the impression they and a strange young cleric bard had on her. She would battle with her anger for many years to come, but she chose to stay in civilization, taking on the same role her father held, but as an unyielding defender of life, as the personification of nature's wrath held precariously in control. Kokia does come into later campaigns as I reused her and her story evolved, but this was largely the primary defining series of events for her as a character. Kokia had gone from an aloof hermit druid to a sworn defender of nature built on a conviction that though the world was broken and she did not always like it, it was still worth defending. Kokia is the start of a personal myth for me. That is what I see those characters we truly connect with most deeply to be, because it is my contention that role-playing games, even more than stories themselves, are us playing out our subconscious contents through the prisms of our characters. Psychologically, I was the person who treated it into their sanctuary. Kokia's was the forest, but mine, for most of my life, was my head. I lived in my books, and I was always thinking. It bothered me endlessly how cruel and callous others could be, especially as a child. And so my fortress was within me, and that was where I stayed. I did not have friends from 3rd through 5th grade, and like Kokia, I did not know really how to socialize appropriately. I've come to believe that I likely live with some level of autism, but though I often have felt this way, I never really let it color my reality much because I never tried or cared to try to get a diagnosis as an adult. As I grew into an adult, my life changed drastically with moving out. My parents' divorce when I was 12, my mother's death when I was 24, among many other events. I eventually could not continue to live so much in my own head. Most of these changes happened over a random smattering of my life, but a character like Kokia does not need to fit a neat timetable. But she does play something out that I was trying to bring into conscious understanding. How could one appropriately interact with the very real evils of the world and not become jaded or ruled by it? Kokia was not a final answer, nor was she even the final form of the question. I think Kokia was an honest expression of how I often felt. Moral evils were exactly that, and they should not be wielded and dealt with. The world is corrupted because we allow it to be through our moral weaknesses and lack of conviction. We allow this because we have not integrated what true meaning is. We have not attempted to grasp that transcendent ideal and are blinded by greed and hubris. I am not a saint myself, and though I have grown to understand these feelings, they are very real. I once told a close friend of mine that my greatest sinful temptation has long been that of wrath, and ultimately the pride that feeds it. And it is pride or hubris that I want to explore in my next video of this series with Nicholas Crane, a man willing to rewrite the world to keep a promise. Now let me know down in the comments, have any of your characters taught you anything about yourself that surprised you? As a student of psychology and psychoanalytic therapy, I am incredibly interested in hearing what others' experiences have been. Also, if this has piqued your interest and are curious to learn a little more about the concepts like archetypes in stories, you can follow the link in this video to another new release of mine on the archetypes in Disney's Robin Hood, and a full speed drawing of the dank crypts will be available next to that as well. If you appreciate this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. It is my mission to promote therapy and roleplay, as well as helping others see life and themselves more clearly through the magic of stories. Peace!